Town of Clayton Planning Board, Tuesday, December 21st, 2021 into session. And my first thought is to congratulate our former chair, Andrea Archer, for being elected to the town council, and we congratulate you. So that's why as vice chair, I'll be chairing tonight. But we also have her here to help us and everything. She's been assigned to the planning board, so we have her expertise to continue to help us here. But congratulations, Andrew. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? No adjustments. Approval of minutes, they were attached to our email. Any additions or corrections? Do I hear a motion for approval? Mr. Powers, second.
Second.
James Lipscomb, sitting so close here I can't. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. So it's passed. Minutes were approved for October 25th, 2021. New business. 2021-141 RZ Cloud Break Investments rezoning. Call on the staff.
Hello, everyone from the board and Councilmember Archer. My name is Aaron Pritchard. I am Planner 2 here at the town. I will be presenting to you tonight the rezoning of a piece of property. Let me just pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, the property is on Everett Avenue between East Champion Street and South Bowling Street. As you can see here, I have outlined the property on the screen. It's an aerial map showing it. It's 2 parcels here. Altogether, it's about 0.262 acres, so a little bit over a quarter of an acre in size. The proposed rezone is from single-family residential, 8,000 square feet. That's R8. They would like to move to single-family residential 6. That's R6. Existing use is vacant, as you can see there. Next slide. Okay. So it's currently zoned R8. Proposed zoning would be R6. One thing to note, in that top map, it doesn't show, this was actually taken from the GIS map online, which has not yet been updated, but the parcel that is directly west of the outlined parcel is also owned by the applicant, and that's already been rezoned to R6. So it shows as R8, but that's also R6 as well. Here's a photo I took showing the public notice signs that were posted. I put two of them out there, so should be good. Real quick, before I read the consistency and compatibility, I should mention that the existing parcel, that small one there, the western one that's a little sliver, it's currently non-conforming, so it's not, the lot size is smaller than 8,000 square feet. So it doesn't even conform with the current zoning district. So that's one of the main reasons for proposing the rezone, is to move it to a zoning district that's a little bit closer in size to it. And I should note as well that following the conclusion, assuming that the rezone would be approved, the applicant is looking to recombine the 2 lots that we've shown here, as well as the one that I mentioned that was already rezoned to R6 as a recombination plat that we would review and approve at the staff level to create 3 new lots of at least 6,000 square feet. After reviewing the town's comprehensive growth plan, it is consistent, pretty well consistent with it. There's two goals that I've outlined here, LU1 and LU3, which I feel speak to it pretty well. The first one, preserve Clayton's character while allowing for growth and development in appropriate areas. Under that, it mentions as a policy to manage future growth and quality development through the implementation of the comprehensive plan, the UDC, and other plans and regulations. That part about the UDC I think is applicable here because it's currently not conforming with the UDC given that it's a non-conforming lot size. So an approval of a rezone and then a completion of a recombination plat would bring it into conformance with the town's code. The second goal that I feel it is consistent with is LU3, which encourages a range of housing types and lot sizes to meet the needs of various income levels, family sizes, and ages. You have R8 and R6 zoning in this area, so a rezone to R6 would be consistent with the surrounding properties. This was taken from the town's future land use map, and as you can see here, the growth plan future land use map calls for high-density residential with an overlay of community mixed use. So that high-density residential land use designation, moving it to R6, given that R6 is our most dense residential district, would conform with that pretty closely. So in conclusion, planning staff recommends approval of the proposed rezoning request at council, and we recommend to you, the board, to recommend approval to town council.
Thank you, Mr. Pritchard.
Yes, sir. That concludes my presentation. If there's any questions, I'm happy to
Any
answer.
questions from members?
Just what's hopefully a minor clarification. The
Sorry, could you press the button?
push to talk loud.
I can hear you okay. But,
I got to hold it?
yep, you're good.
Okay, sorry. There's no reason to have the preliminary survey that's in the agenda or in the packet with what we're doing tonight. Is that correct?
Do you mean the recombination plat that they submitted?
The thing that had confused me was that in the staff report, we're talking about 2 lots. On the survey, we're talking about 3 lots.
Yes, sir.
And I just had confusion with that. But and from what I think I'm hearing from you, the preliminary plat is not to be confused with anything we're doing tonight.
Correct. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. That's a good point. Yeah, I apologize for any confusion there. We normally include any exhibits that the applicant submits as part of their rezoning application, and so they just submitted that to us, even though that's going to be handled at the staff level as a recombination plat review. We just threw it in there, so apologize for that. And next time I'll be sure to clarify that for you. So yeah, I believe that shows that the westernmost lot is already rezoned to R6. So, so yeah, apologies for any confusion.
Any other questions? If not, we'll hear from the applicant. Applicant's not here. I thought that was a requirement.
Not that I'm aware, no. I didn't get any correspondence from them stating that they would be here though, either, so.
Okay. Thank you for the staff. Are there any questions from the audience? Don't see anybody. Turn it over to the planning board for discussion and recommendations.
Apologies, Board, one more comment. So reading the town's Unified Development Code, it states that based on whatever you decide to either approve or deny your recommendation, it does state, I'm going to read off my paper here. The planning board's recommendation shall include a written statement to the town council describing whether its recommendation is consistent with the adopted plans and policies of the town. So just a statement of consistency. And I'll note real quick here, should you vote to make a recommendation of approval, you can use the language that I provided here, taking the goals and policies and strategies from the town's growth plan, and use that verbatim if you wish. So just something to note. And with that, I think that's all I've got.
Thank you.
On goal LU3, where you say encourage a range of housing types, and I was wondering, what is in the best interest of Clayton? I know you said it's consistent with the zoning in that area, but on the long term, what would be in the best interest of Clayton? Because it's very rarely that we get a diversity of housing types. This is very consistent than what's been presented to us for the past 3 years. Smaller and smaller lots, smaller home fronts, basically, as I stated previously, workforce housing, entry-level housing. So in the long term, what would be in the best interest of Clayton, since this plan doesn't present any diversity of any other plan we've received in the last 3 years?
Yeah, so the applicant, they've shared only a few details kind of what they're planning to do with the site. From what I understand, with the recombination of lots, they're looking at 3 different lots. As you said, they would be fairly small. So from what I understand, I believe they want to do single-family homes here. With them being on smaller pieces of property, they would be a bit more affordable. At least that's my anticipation. So planning feels that if such a product would probably provide additional housing stock availability. The town's workforce is growing, and so we feel that it would help to meet that need as well. So.
I believe it's consistent with the neighborhood. It makes sense. The R6 is right there by it. If the R6 was not touching it, basically, I would feel like it was more of a spot zoning issue, but I do not feel it's spot zoning. I support the rezoning based on the staff's recommendations, and I would like to make a motion that we
So, sorry to interrupt real quick. Could you just press the button?
Oh, I thought I had it pressed. My green light's on. Can you not hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't think the microphone's picking it up.
Okay. Hey. Can
Yep,
you hear me
you're
now?
good.
Okay. I
There
gotta
you
get
go.
Closer.
Yeah.
Closer. So, what I was saying is I feel like it's consistent with the adjacent zoning. Mm-hmm. And I think it's wrong for us just to assume that a smaller lot is going to be an inferior product. Especially when you look inside the Beltline, and I think, in a lot of ways, downtown Clayton is becoming, if you look at what's happened over the last year with pricing, it's changing, and it's changing rapidly. I do not know the product that's being proposed for this, but I believe this same developer has a bunch of lots here and is developing stuff across the street also. So I would assume that they're going to want to do something that has a certain amount of quality so they can get the best return out of their investment as an overall development scheme there. So based on the staff recommendation and the staff report and the fact that it has adjacent R6 zoning, I think it's appropriate. And I would like to move that we approve rezoning 2021-141-RZ for Cloud Break Investments.
So we have a motion, Mr. Lipscomb, to recommend approval to the town council. Do I have a second? Mr. Powers? Any discussion? You ready for the vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's unanimous. Item B on the new business, 2021-126 OA Steep Slopes Text Amendment, reconsideration at direction of Town Council. I'll turn it over to Mr. Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, board members. So as you may have heard, what we're here tonight is at the direction of the Town Council, they have decided to reconsider the text amendment that was approved on November 15th to remove the steep slopes language from the resource conservation areas section of our ordinance. And so we're here tonight to, I have a presentation to give you some more information, a little bit more detailed information than what I was able to give to you back in October. Essentially, it's a very similar presentation we gave to council last night, and with some more information on some options you may want to consider at the end of tonight to recommend towards town council. Public hearing is scheduled for this item in front of town council on January 3rd. So just a reminder of resource conservation areas. Currently, they include 100-year floodplain, stream buffer areas, and jurisdictional wetlands. As you can see, stormwater control measures are prohibited. Roads, parking lots, and impervious surfaces are prohibited unless specifically authorized by another governmental entity. And then golf courses, agriculture, and forestry activities are also prohibited if they're not conducted according to accepted best management practices. Intent of RCAs include protecting natural resources, preserving visual and aesthetic qualities, encouraging site design techniques that preserve the natural environment, enhancing the developed environment, controlling erosion, slippage, and sediment runoff into streams and waterways, and protecting wildlife and migration corridors. The 2045 growth plan does address resource conservation areas. Policy NR 1.1 specifically states preserve key natural areas while accommodating new development. Strategy NR 1.1.1 continues to say to continue to discourage development in primary resource conservation areas, which are defined as floodplains, protected stream buffers, slopes above 20% of at least 5,000 square feet contiguous areas, and slopes above 15% within 100 feet of blue line streams and wetlands. And then strategy NR 1.1.2 continues to discuss secondary resource conservation areas, which are defined below. So steep slopes are often associated with environmental features such as riparian buffers, floodplains, rock outcroppings, shallow soils, and groundwater seeps. And they are typically stable in their natural state. However, they can become unstable when modified by either vegetation, grading, or change in hydraulics. And there's oftentimes protections of steep slopes in municipal codes to extend protection of these environmentally sensitive areas. So some advantages of protecting steep slopes include preserving environmentally sensitive areas, providing additional habitat for wildlife, and preserving existing vegetation. And disadvantages include restricting developable land, and also for usually town staff, potentially increased administrative responsibilities to ensure the protection of steep slopes continues. These next few slides, I will do my best to walk you through. They were prepared by our engineering staff, and I don't have quite the environmental expertise that they do, but I will do my best. I've seen them give this presentation a couple times, so hopefully I can do a decent job at it. So this map on the screen here is one that we had provided council, I think, back in November, and it's just to give you an idea of the different ways to protect steep slopes, or what our options we've provided, sort of how those would affect. So the area in blue there is the resource conservation area. And that area in green hatching outside of that would be a 100-foot buffer on that. And then the orange area are steep slopes that would be protected through one of the, I think roughly 4 options we provided later on in this presentation. The red areas are steep slopes that are not connected to any of those other areas and therefore would not be protected under our new guidelines or under the proposed amendments we provided you. So another way to look at it these next few slides give you sort of a profile view. So you see there the blue line is the stream and the orange line would be riparian buffer, and then the green line is the land sloping up away from the riparian buffer, and you see there it's 30% slope directly connecting to the riparian buffer, then it flattens out to a 10% slope, and then it has another area of 30% slope. Under the previous ordinance where we required protection of 5,000 square feet of contiguous areas, both those areas in pink potentially would have been protected if they were 5,000 square feet in size or larger. Under some of our options we provide you that we're providing you tonight, we're really narrowing down to that section that's closest to the stream and the riparian buffer. So the stream and the riparian buffer are already required to be protected as resource conservation areas. And unfortunately it's cut off a little bit, but down at the very bottom of the screen is 100 foot. So if we go with one of the options, which talks about direct connection, then that 30% slope, pretty all the way up to the 10% mark would roughly be protected in pink. If we went with a 100-foot buffer, there you see in that area in pink on the slide would be protected. And here you see an example of an area where we have just directly connected to the riparian buffer is a 10% slope, but then it goes to 40% outside of that. If we use that 100-foot buffer, we would then still be able to protect some of that 40% slope, even though it's not directly connected. Yes, ma'am?
Just so I understand, so the 10% would still be open to build?
In this example, the 10% would be protected. Well, I'm sorry. In this example, the 10% would not be protected, but the 40% slope would be. So yeah, the 10% would technically be, potentially could be open for development. So, and then this is a table we had provided to council previously, just giving a brief summary of other jurisdictions, what they require for steep slope protection. As you can see, it varies, but most jurisdictions are somewhere at roughly around 25%. There's a few that are at 30%, a few that are at 15%. You'll see on the far right under the notes, our engineering staff did try and note if they were less or more stringent than our requirements. So the current language as amended on November 15th is what you see on the screen, and steep slopes are not mentioned in section 155-500. What I have provided you tonight are 4 options. They're generally the same that we had provided previously. I just, they're reworked slightly, but these are the 4 options, and I actually have the language on the next 4 slides to walk you through a little bit better.
Excuse me, Ben.
Yeah.
You said that on November the 15th, you did a text amendment to change, go back one.
Oh.
I don't want it to go over our heads. So there was amended just a month ago to extrapolate the previous requirement. So why are we here tonight if it was amended a month ago?
So the council that was seated on November 15th, there was a majority of that council was no longer seated on December 6th. They either did not run for re-election or they did not win re-election. And so we had a new majority council seated on December 6th. And at the end of that December 6th meeting, there was a request by that council to reconsider this text amendment. And last night at the council meeting, they officially voted to reconsider the text amendment and have asked the planning board to provide a recommendation once again on potential language.
Thank you.
Excuse me. So the first option that we provided for you here is essentially going back to the language that was in place prior to November 15th, tweaked slightly, but to clarify the 25% steep slopes. But this section would be, this option would protect natural steep slopes, 25% or greater of at least 5,000 square feet contiguous area, and would not matter whether, in this option, it does not matter if it's connected to another environmentally sensitive feature or not. It's just if it's 5,000 square feet or greater, it would require protection. Option 2 would protect any steep slopes of 25% or greater that are directly connected to the 100-year floodplain, stream buffer areas, or jurisdictional wetlands. Option 3 would protect natural steep slopes 25% or greater within 100 feet of one of those 3 features. So essentially, we would be putting a 100-foot buffer on those features, and any steep slopes within that buffer would be protected.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you, but I've got a lot of questions.
Yeah, remember to hit your mic, please.
Sorry about that. So, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a blue line stream that by state and federal regulations has a 50-foot buffer on each side, 100-foot total, you would be protecting, or the property owner would be losing that 50-foot. And let's say that there is a floodplain beside that that's 100-foot wide. So then you've got a stream, 50-foot required buffer, another 100-foot of floodplain. So would you be protecting any steep slope from within 100 foot of the edge of that floodplain? So that would be 250 foot away from the actual blue line stream.
Potentially, yes. If there were steep slopes as defined in the ordinance within 100 foot of that floodplain, they would be required to be protected under this option.
So one question, and I'm going to make some statements, and again, if you understand what I say to be incorrect, please correct me. But from what I understand, this rule has been in place for at least 15 years, I believe.
I believe that's a number that's been thrown out. I'm not sure myself, but yeah.
So during that time, we've had 3 different town managers and 3 different planning directors before you that never enforced this rule. They gave waivers for it. From what I understand, the first enforcement of this rule was on O'Neill Overlook subdivision, and it was after the town took in in-house stormwater management, and I believe that was the first time this rule has ever been enforced.
I cannot say for certain if that was the first time this rule was enforced. I believe other staff have said that there are other projects out there where this rule had been enforced in the past. I think I would say it probably, I don't think it was across the board not enforced. I think it was, it may not have been enforced. It may not have been enforced across the board, but I think it was, there were certain projects where whether it was an enforcement, whether it was enforced by staff or whether the applicants and their engineers read our ordinance and showed resource conservation areas, including the steep slopes on their plans. My understanding is that there are some plans out there where steep slopes are shown as being protected as RCAs. Now, whether that was because they were told by planning staff to do that or other staff to do that, or whether they did that because they read the ordinance and drew their plans in accordance to the ordinance, that I cannot answer.
And I'm going to make a statement here. I know the council can do what the council wants to do. Personally, for me tonight, I don't feel like I have a command enough of the subject to make a recommendation. So I'll be voting against any recommendation tonight. I really have an issue with us not holding ourselves to the professionalism that I feel like we need to have a command of the subject. Because everybody wants to say, I want to hug the trees, but if you don't understand the implications of it, you know what I mean? Are you really doing good? You know, what are we really trying to do? And really what blows my mind is to call a slope that can be mowed with a lawnmower, a riding lawnmower. Somebody can actually ride a lawnmower on a 4-to-1 slope, and we're calling it a steep slope. That blows my mind. You know, is it a 2-to-1 slope? That's definitely a steep slope. You know, maybe a 3-to-1. We allow in our code, we have, when we mass grade subdivisions per the town of Clayton's adopted rules, you know, there's 2 and 3-to-1 slopes that we are allowing to be man-made. And, you know, it just is a 4-to-1 slope. Is that reasonable? You know, and I don't just fully understand, and I hope the council wants to fully understand the implications of what they're voting on. And I just don't feel like with me being in the development industry, you know, I've got a horticulture degree, you know, more of an agriculture degree, but I've been doing this for 28 years as, you know, an adult. And I'm having a hard time seeing it in my brain and really rationalizing it. And I really wonder if the rest of the board and if the town council really understands the implications. And, you know, whenever this was, you know, something that could be waived by staff, you know, it was that's completely different than having to go to the Board of Adjustments now and ask for a variance, you know, and also the time frame that's involved with that. And literally, you know, I think that if we're correct with our assumption a while ago to say that you got 150 foot of floodplain, you know, outside of the edge of a creek, and remember that might flood once a year, once every 2 years. You know, I don't know what the standards are for a floodplain. But you're talking about potentially an additional 100 feet. So, you know, somebody that has a 400-foot wide piece of property, you know, could potentially be losing 250 foot under, I believe it's option 3 that we were just talking about. So, to me, the only thing I can say with conviction tonight is I don't feel like that I understand it good enough to make an educated decision and understand the implications of my recommendation tonight. And that's why I can't, in good faith, support any of the options. I feel like looking at it from the outside, because I'm assuming, and Kimberly might be able to, or Ms. Moffitt might be able to tell me, has there already been a public hearing advertised for this?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's like, why is it being so rushed? You know, why does the council want to, you know, have it come back immediately? You know, if it was something that was on the books for that long and never enforced, why is it so important at this point? When I argue that I don't think that the decision makers at this point truly understand the implications that they're putting people under. So,
Again, I will say, I don't know that we can say for certain that it was never enforced, but again, you know, none of the staff that previously are here anymore, so, you know, we obviously can't ask them, but my understanding is that there are projects out there that, you know, where steep slopes have been protected in the past. So again, I wouldn't necessarily say it was never enforced, but it certainly was not enforced uniformly, I would feel comfortable in saying.
And I completely understand, and I have talked to one of the previous planning directors, and I know during their tenure here, it was not enforced during that time. But I still just question the whole thing, and again, I've said many times that I want to have great professionalism on this board. I want to educate ourselves. I want to become better, and I want, you know, to hopefully help Clayton and leave it better than we found it. And I don't think we can do it without that level of professionalism and us educating ourselves and truly understanding what we're voting on.
All right.
I believe Ms. Bagley has.
If I could, I would jump in, and to your point, I do understand it's very important for me as well to really know then feel that I have a grasp of everything. But to just, I would point out what you had mentioned, that people have, that's kind of in the past. And I think what we're trying to do based on the 2045 growth plan is to really unite all of the boards and councils and be able to hold fast and hold steady with decisions that are made going forward. I don't know what's happened in the past. I wasn't here. I can't speak to that. And you may very well be, correct in that things weren't quite followed through on maybe. But I feel that that's the goal here, especially with the 2045 growth plan and how fast Clayton is growing. You mentioned speed. That would be my assumption, that we're just trying to get things in place so that more development isn't made and we have issues down the road. I don't know if this is my place to say, but I was here last night for the meeting. And ironically, we had a gentleman stand up who was very frustrated with the backlash of a development, with the water problems, with all of that. We also did have somebody, am I overspeaking? We also did have somebody, NC State, I can't rattle off all of her credentials, but she walked up and she said, I've done the research, I've done everything. I work for NC State, but I'm not here representing them. I say, don't touch the wetlands, leave them alone. That was what she had said. So just for your information, I thought I would pass that along. I didn't know.
And as far as wetlands, I completely understand that. I'm just talking about the additional buffer that's required beyond what the state and the federal government require. I think that to me is like, why are we doing that? And if we are going to hold developers and property owners to that standard, we need to understand it, but to me, there's no question, tonight, from what I understand, we're only talking about steep slopes. The resource conservation areas are protected already. So we haven't got to worry about wetlands. We haven't got to worry about the stream buffers. All we're talking about is a mowable slope at 4 to 1. And literally, the way I look at it, if you take a 8-foot run, it rises 2 foot over 8 foot, and it's kind of like, I've been trying to rationalize that in my brain, and I think I understand what that is, but I told myself, and I just haven't had time, that I was going to, make me a little model, so we can actually see how gentle that is. That's about twice, I believe it's about twice as steep as a handicap ramp, and that is what bothers me, is that, we don't need to say, oh, everything that has got an environmental tag for it's necessarily good, because we got to look at the overall implications. But again, I don't think that we are worried about if we don't move forward with a recommendation. I know the council is going to do what they want to do, but if we don't move forward with a recommendation tonight, we aren't putting wetlands and stream buffers in jeopardy.
Mr. Coates. Mr. Howell, I think that when we say 25% or greater, if I'm not mistaken, that 25% or greater slope is considered an extremely steep slope. So we're not talking about just a minor hill here. I think that it's being presented too simplistically. So if you look at the gradient of slopes, I've done some research too. When you say steep slope, you're usually talking about 15% or greater. And then you're talking about a moderately steep, 15 to 25. And then you're talking about extremely steep slopes, you're talking about a gradient of 25% plus. So I don't want us to be too simplistic to think that we're just talking about a little hump in the yard. We're talking about something that's very important, that's designed, as we stated, it serves a purpose. And the buffer is important because we're really talking about protecting our habitat and our water quality. And we're really trying to prevent the sediment and other contaminants reaching into our streams and our waterways. So I think it is important, and I do want to move on with your presentation. Unlike some others, I do plan to vote one way or the other, and I'm going to be succinct with my comments, but thank you. So only thing I ask is, could you really explain the purpose of a slope?
Of the
purpose of a slope.
Of a
slope, and especially a slope that's an extremely steep slope.
Are you asking to explain why we should, like, why to protect it, or?
Yes, or before you get to that, why should we protect it? What is the purpose of a slope? Because we just heard a comment that a slope is mowable. Well, it is inferring that somebody with a push mower can just, in their yard, roll over a small little hump, and we're not talking about a ditch. We're talking about an extremely steep slope at a gradient of 25% or more. So I wanted to say, what is the purpose of a slope in that 500,000 square foot area as in the previous ordinance?
Right, so I will try my best here. So one thing to note is that the ordinance language that we're providing it's natural steep slopes. So we're not talking about slopes that are created. And Mr. Lipscomb is right. We do have ordinances and engineering guidelines in town that allow a developer to create at least 4-to-1 slopes, I think, or, up to 25% slopes for, for stormwater or whatnot, or as part of their grading operations. This ordinance language is specifically focused on naturally occurring steep slopes areas. One of the problems with the language in option 1, that, going back to sort of how we had it, and one of the problems that I think staff had recognized with that is that when we just say over 5,000 square feet must be protected, we did end up occasionally with steep slope areas that would be required to be protected that did not really have any connection to another natural feature, and that very well could have been formed. They were considered natural because they've been out there for a number of years, but they could have been formed 50 years ago by someone digging a pond for a farm and, creating a big hill, and then over 50 years, it becomes a natural hill, and therefore, all of a sudden now it becomes protected. So that was one of the concerns with the original language, and why most of the options that you see tonight and that you've heard over the last few weeks have been around requiring some connection to those other natural features. The best I can tell you on besides that too, is that from what we've heard from the experts that, the lady who was here from NC State Cooperative Extension last night, and what our own staff, in the engineering department have said, is that slopes, it may be important, it is important, to protect slopes that are adjacent or adjoining or connected to some of these natural features, because they, especially with changing in hydrology, it can cause, steeper slopes are more likely to have erosion, and if they're, and that can lead into the stream, and then you end up with a dirty stream. So that is one of the reasons why I think this does continue to come back, and why the council has asked for this reconsideration of this, because there is some understanding that I think there's probably fairly wide agreement that the previous language in place prior to November 15th may have been too broad and may have been difficult to enforce, and that may have led to why it was not enforced uniformly. But that's why the options that staff has provided over these last couple months have been trying to focus in on what are the steep slopes that really should be protected. And so we as staff are giving, our best guesses and our best information to you as to these are the areas that probably deserve the best protection, but ultimately it is going to be a policy decision for, this board's recommendation, town council, as, from a town perspective, what does the town want to see protected? So with that, I'm going to finish up. I just have a couple more slides. So again, option 3 that we're on would, so just stepping back one, option 2 would require steep slopes 25% or greater that are directly connected to one of the above features be protected. Option 3 would protect natural steep slopes 25% or greater within 100 feet of one of the above features. So again, that's that buffering. And then the 4th option goes back to the directly connected, but it requires that direct connection to be at least 20 feet wide. So the big difference between option 4 and option 2 is that in option 2, if there's any direct connection, literally 2-foot wide direct connection, it would be protected. Whereas in option 4, it has to be at least at 20 feet wide. The other thing I do want to note that we have staff have sort of gone back and forth with, and these options are slightly different than what you originally saw in October, because we're trying to also make sure that whatever options we propose can be enforceable and that we can administer. These options, the options 2, 3, and 4, do not have a minimum size. And so, but again, we're only looking at protecting that section that is directly connected. So essentially it's, it's as long as it's 25% or greater and it's still connected, it would be protected. But the minute, or, at the exact point that slope drops below 25%, then, that protection would end. So I did want to make that clear, because it is a little confusing. One more slide. This is just the final slide that I'll sit on here and I've just provided these points to try and help guide you through your discussion. And again, some, from what I could see, options that the planning board could consider tonight. One, make no change, or recommend that the language as adopted on November 15th stay that, and make that recommendation to the town council. Another option for the board would be to recommend one of those 4 options that we provided, to add steep slopes back into the definition of resource conservation areas for protection. Another option is, if you don't like any of the options we provided, or think one of the options we provided needs to be modified, you can certainly recommend that, and I will try my best to put that recommendation into writing for the town council and provide them what you're looking for. And then, of course, the 4th option, which Mr. Lipscomb already really, mentioned, is you could make no recommendation, and for that you can make no recommendation and ask to continue this item to the January planning board meeting. If you did that, I'm not sure how we would handle the town council public hearing on January 3rd. We would have to look into that. Or you could also just make no recommendation at all and tell town council that you do not feel comfortable making a recommendation, and town council could move forward with their public hearing on January 3rd. Mr. Powers.
Yes, one thing I want to say is I agreed with what James said this evening, and he had mentioned earlier, or somewhat like this, that the board needs training in various, something like this would be one of them, to get somebody in here. I don't know who the lady was last night from NC State who was explaining stuff. If that's what she does for a living, somebody like that might be able to explain things in a way we could understand it. Then the other thing was that James said these ordinances had been on the books for at least 15 years, and there's never been any need to enforce them. If there were, if it was like you were saying, that they might have been enforced if the developer was talked to. The developer on their own may have gone along with what the ordinance was, and that's what they went with. But also, if you're talking about 15 years ago, the development in Clayton does not really compare 15 years ago with what's going on now. And what's going on now probably needs to be not checked or not slowed down or anything like that, but made sure that things are going in the direction that they should be going. If it didn't need to be done 15 years ago, that's fine. If the engineering firms or developers was doing it on their own, that's fine. But with the amount of development that's going on currently in Clayton, the town needs to be aware of what's going on and needs to make sure that all the developers know, how far they can go or what they should be doing. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Any other comments? I have one of my own. We made a recommendation last time for option 2. And I listened, I wasn't able to come to the town council last night, but I listened to that presentation. The lady from NC State, I think she indicated because she wasn't representing NC State is why she made that statement, that it wasn't officially NC State. But she certainly had the qualifications and everything to answer questions. So I don't have any problem with her, what she said and everything. But I haven't heard anything to change my mind on what we recommended, you know, with the knowledge that I know about slopes and everything from the last time when we recommended option 2 to make any other recommendation. That's just my individual, not as acting chair tonight. That's just my opinion. With that, I guess we would open it for the floor. If anybody in the audience would like to make a comment before we close it and have a discussion up here for recommendation. Would you give your name and sign in, please, and address, please?
Thank you. My name is Stephen Smith. I live at 1814 North O'Neill Street. My property backs up to the Neuse River, so I'm severely impacted by what might happen here, but that's not what brings me here. What I would like you to consider that anytime you make a change to an ordinance like this, you realize that there's somebody that actually owns the property and is being severely impacted by these ordinance changes. It's not, everybody wants clean water, everybody wants the environment protected. But we could, if you really wanted just to protect the environment and shut everything down, say no development. So we're looking at how to do it the best way. Johnston County, which I didn't see on the list, has come up with a 25-page guideline that's available on the town website as to what they think the riparian buffer zones are. It's under the wastewater treatment plant amendment N. They have a list of what there is. They're sticking with the 50-foot. Minimum, under certain circumstances, a slope, they're actually dropping it down to 30-foot. So 50-foot filters out most of your sediment. At least that's from their point of view. From the state's point of view, anytime you go beyond that and try to expand that, you get diminishing returns. The further you get from it, the less you're going to, the water has a chance to drop the sediment, so the less you're actually gaining by protecting. So this is something you need to realize, that what you're doing is taking somebody's property and putting a restriction on it, saying you can't do anything to this, you have to leave it in a natural state. So you're, in effect, seizing their property, something they've paid rights to. They have the right to sell, but you're taking away any uses of it. And then turning around and saying, well, what does it protect? Last time this was presented to the planning board, if I understood correctly, the engineer stood up and said, we can easily find out how many acres is covered by this. I see no part of this presentation that shows that, except in your agenda packet, there was a map. If you've looked at that map, it looks like there's a tremendous amount of area that is covered by this. I don't know, I can't quantify it. If you change the percentage of the slope up to, say, 35 or 40, it would reduce that and therefore lessen the impact on the individual landowner. I see no chance of finding out what those are in the short time period that this has been introduced. It's like These are your options. You have 4 options, or basically 5 options. One is to do nothing. But we're not given enough information to know how big of an impact this is actually actually occurs to the landowners. I think that's an important aspect of this. It's not, the developer community will adopt and adapt to whatever rules you put in place. They basically have to if they're going to develop, or they go somewhere else. Some of the judicial areas that were listed may or may not have the type of topography we have here. Johnston County obviously does encounter a lot of the topography we have here. I think that you need to review what they have, how they have things spelled out, and see how that works. That's, I think, in my short, quick read of it, it's basically what you have right now. So what they're asking, what's being looked at is, are you really getting a return when you expand it out? And how much of that is really a return to help the water quality? What does it, extra 100 foot or extra 50 foot away from a riparian buffer, how much are you actually adding? It's like adding insulation on a house. At a certain point, you have to stop adding the insulation. So how much more do you want to add on to protect this water? How much do you actually get when you keep adding on? And that's the question really that's before you. And I think that more information would be a help for you, and somebody that can actually answer, all right, if you go the extra 100 foot, if you go 200 foot, if you change the slope to a different slope, if you increase it to say 40 or 30% or 35%, how much does it really change the water quality that makes it through not only what you're adding, but that already existing buffer? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
And I don't see that there's anything to sign in. I did sign in outside.
No other questions from the audience. I'll turn it over to the board for discussion and recommendations.
I move that we recommend option 2, which was our previous recommendation to council.
I have a motion to recommend option 2 by Mr. Moore. Is that second?
I second.
Second by Ms. Begley. Any discussion? All right, I have a question then is to vote. All in favor of recommending to the town council for their consideration of option number 2. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
I think it was 6-1. So we are recommending option 2.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Item 6, informal discussion and public comment. Ms. Archer.
Good evening, Andrea Archer. Am I correct that this would be your last planning board meeting with us, Mr. Bucky Coates?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I wanted to take some time here this evening to thank you for your service and tell you how grateful I am to have learned so much from you over the past 4 years. I don't know if the board was aware that this was your last meeting or not, but you taught me the importance of reading everything in that packet and visiting the sites in question, and I've really learned so much from watching you, and I know how much time and effort that takes now that I've done it myself so many times. And so for you to do that for how many years?
18.
For 18 years for the town of Clayton. I just can't tell you how grateful I personally am. I also just reached out to a couple people in Clayton who I know have worked with you. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to share with you their comments. This comes from Mr. Marty Bizzle, who I'm sure many of you remember. Bucky was on the planning board when I joined the board in 2008, and I immediately realized that Bucky was always so well prepared and had done his homework on all the cases that came before the board. He became someone that I respected and really became a role model for me. Thank you, Bucky, for all of your years of service and for being someone that I look up to, literally. I also got some words from Mr. Michael Granis, who I'm sure you know well as well. And he said that to thank you on his behalf and let you know that you have made an incredible difference in our community through the years. Your commitment has been beyond reproach, and you will be sincerely missed. So thank you on his behalf for all your years of service. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Andrew, and I thank the town council these years for accepting my application and reappointing me, and I appreciate the town of Clayton for presenting me that presentation at the recognition service the other night. It was heartfelt, as I said. I didn't have any words, but I do appreciate it, and it's time for me to move on. But I've had a great time and enjoyed it, and I thank you for your recognition. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate everybody's support. With that, we come to item 7, adjournment. Your recommendation to adjourn? So moved by Mr. Moore, I believe.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lipscomb. All in favor? Go home. Thank you, everyone.